This session is sponsored by California Payroll, a trusted partner in providing clients with modern HR and payroll solutions for over 20 years.
My name is Stacy Briscoe. I'm the managing editor at Wine Industry Network's Wine Industry Advisor. And today I am joined with Alary, who's the managing partner for the Personnel Perspective, Sandra Hess, who is the founder of the DTC workshops, and Joel Miller, who is the owner and principal of ChateauHR Consulting. And this is our human resources HR panel discussion. We're going to be talking about talent retention, as well as recruiting, and how to manage and retain our key talent during what's been going on these past 18 months. The job market has definitely shifted. I do love this quote that I stole from Joel during our first conversation, and he very wisely said, "The employee base has the power to shift. We're now in an era of empowered employees that we've never been in before." So since we started with that Joel quote, perhaps Joel, do you want to explain what you mean by that and how you would describe the current situation of the job market in the wine industry?
Great. Well, thanks, Stacy, and I appreciate the comments there. But my intent here was to show that it's shifted from employers hiring people and getting very discerning about who they hire and people begging for that next great job to employees having a lot more power and a lot more freedom to start choosing who they want to work for, where they want to work, how they want to work. It's really a paradigm shift from where we've been prior to the pandemic. And in that context, it forces us as employers to really shift our perspective about what does it mean to be employer of choice? What does it mean in terms of how I connect with my workforce, especially when we're partially or fully remote? And how do we approach it in slightly different ways than we did before? Because I think the game has changed a bit, and it's going to continue to shift more towards employee choice versus employer choice at times.
And so keeping that in mind, I want to start with people who want to keep the talent that they already have. If it's an employee's world out there and it's their job market to control, how are employers ensuring that they're creating, a safe community, a reliable, work engagement, someplace where they can learn and thrive and grow? And I know this is a pretty big question because we've got, wineries of all shapes and sizes, and it might mean something different to the boutique wine production versus, your many million case production wineries. And so I know, Sandra, you had some good kind of overarching perspective that I think you should share with us.
Sure, Stacy. I look at ending up 2021, as we all know, with 11,500 licensed wine brands in the U.S. today, right? And so obviously the pandemic era really pushing the need for wine brands today to think a little bit differently about how not only they retain, right, key members of the teams, but also how they better attract. And so as Joel touched on, I think just the flexibility and knowing that today, in many situations, the job needs to be designed for the person. Instead of, business 101 for so long, it was design the position, right, based on the business need and then find the person. So I think a lot of shifting is happening when it comes to the retention focus around making sure that those long-term, successful employees, those who have really proven themselves and dedicated themselves to the brand, that they have the support that they need as an individual. And so providing a lot more perks and incentives that go beyond the compensation plan today is very important, especially when we look at about 68% of those wine brands being that small producer, that 5,000 case and under.
So what would be some of those kind of key programs or things that they can put in place to engage their employees? And Karen, you can pipe in as well, because I know you have experience with the smaller brands as well.
Yeah, we work a lot with the smaller and mid-size brands. I guess in my opinion, there is no cookie cutter approach. Certainly there are things that across the board you see consistently in different wineries. Supporting in any engagement survey we do, we hear, and this has been the case for years, we want to further our it's the skill building and training piece of it. And what are the career paths within this winery? Maybe doing some rotations. So, we get to see and learn about all the different pieces of the winery and how they operate. I think having conversations with employees is critical to hear what they have to say. This goes beyond the engagement survey. It's the keeping in touch with the employees to get a sense of what's going on for them at any given time, and also empowering employees. I think that's really important. I don't know that that's new, but I think it's very important today as well.
Right. And DTC Wine Workshops focuses mainly on the DTC hospitality side of the wine industry. And for years now, we focus greatly on this concept of building brand ambassadors. And so today, brand ambassadors aren't just external, not just club members or long-term, loyalists and consumer audiences, but really it begins from inside out. And so from a retention model, then how do you create internal brand ambassadors? And when you're able to do that, typically it's, that loyalty is proven, the connection is stronger, and it becomes much harder for hospitality staff to make the move.
I just thought of a cool part there, Sandra, then that when I was at Jackson Family, we actually did a time when we sent all of our executives out to go blind tasting, to go out, secret shop or whatever, but they had to go to 3 different wineries. They had to go unannounced and not part of the trade, just go experience what was it like to go into a different tasting room. And they came back with all these ahas of which, is core to your business of, from great treatment, ignored in the tasting room to all that kind of stuff. And it goes to Karen's point about cross-training and learning experiences, right? Is get people out of just their silo and their mold and get them thinking about the whole business in different ways. And, if you got to, get production people out to taste rooms, get taste room people into the vineyards, all those kind of things really enhance the whole employment experience. If that makes sense.
It really does make sense. I mean, we look at also in some cases, those top performers, the superstars on the DTC or hospitality management side that have been around 8 years, 10 years at one wine brand. And we know in the world of hospitality, that's rare today. So how do we get the managers also better ingrained into the company culture and create a more stickable, that stickability term, right, with the brand? And one, I think, really effective, tool that we've used and helped our clients build upon is helping build long-term career paths for these hospitality managers, directors, that includes their participation in local associations, serving on board of directors at the local winery association, serving in leadership roles in different capacities within that wine region makes it really hard for them, that winery manager, that hospitality manager, to then leave a wine brand and go somewhere else.
So one of the things that we also talked about is, this idea of incentives. There are certain things that employees need or expect, given the circumstances. A lot of folks who their job will allow would prefer to work from home or have the option to work from home certain days. And obviously money always plays a factor, right? I mean, people need health insurance, people need a solid paycheck. And so I'm wondering, if these educational opportunities and these opportunities to get involved in these external programs and become brand ambassadors, are those the kinds of incentives that are attractive to either potential or current employees as, okay, maybe we can't spend more money to pay you more than what we're offering, but if you join us or if you stick with us, is that an even playing field, do you think?
I'll jump in and say, yes, it always has been. I just say that it's the impetus and the importance is heightened as we get more competitive, right? So I'm actually going to go back to I want to throw out one word that I want everyone to be thinking about as a manager of an organization, and that is, what's your relationship with your employees, right? This isn't rocket science, there's a piece of this that if your employees have a desire to grow, which by the way, most of them do, and most millennials and Gen Z, they're going to leave a company if they're not growing and taking on additional, depth and perspective in their roles or in new roles. So what's your relationship with your employees? And is that a healthy relationship? Is it a growthful relationship? Or is it a, I'm the boss, do what I say relationship? And if it's the latter, good luck, right? Because there's always going to be greener pastures. The other piece to what you mentioned, I think, Stacey, it's important, is the money aspect, which is, that's a downward spiral. It's going to get you in a lot of, financial trouble, right? If you try and fix this problem with money, you're going to keep chasing your tail. There's always someone out there willing to pay 10% more for your good employees, guaranteed. And if you try and match that every time, you're a dog chasing its tail. And once you catch a car, you don't know what to do with it. And all of a sudden you're spending too much money. So, my advice is make sure you're competitive market-wise, make sure your comp's in the right kind of ballpark. But people aren't going to leave for 50 cents or $2 an hour more. They're going to leave for a greater opportunity for advancement and growth. And for some people, that's training and development. For some people, it's going back to school to get a master's. For other people, it's flexible to work from home and take care of my 3-year-old. Whatever it might be, that's where it goes back to the relationship and understanding what your employees need versus presuming what they want and serving up the wrong dish that they really don't want to dig into.
Right. It kind of goes back to that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses, right? Or their managers.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what Joel just said also translates over into the attraction part of this conversation. Mm-hmm. I think that candidates are looking for so much right now, and it's different, but sustainability programs. What is the winery doing in terms of certifications and the flexibility? So that to me is a big one that's really come forward in the last 3 years since COVID started in a really big way. So obviously some positions you can't offer that flexibility, but many that you can, and it forces employers to sort of rethink, can I change what I was doing in the past in terms of offering sort of a hybrid type of position, working from home and maybe coming into on site once a month, once a week, whatever that is, to make sure that they have that in-person connection with not only their manager, but their team. That's so critical in my opinion. But yeah, there's many other things. I'm probably jumping ahead with the attraction part, but
no, that's great. I think this is a great time to shift in that direction. And you brought up something that I actually was going to ask Sandra about, because you had mentioned that, especially with the jobs that do allow for working from home, be it tech or social media or whatever it is, that work from home doesn't necessarily have to mean in the wine community. If I'm a winery in Sonoma, my work from home person doesn't have to be a Sonoman. It could be somebody in a different state. So do you want to talk about that, like looking for talent in a broader community?
Yes. Obviously the virtual world that we've all been a part of, and here we are today in our Zoom conference, right? And so this virtual world has opened up an opportunity that Karen touched on when it comes to added value, additional perks that employees, especially specialized employees, now can have access to. So for example, a small to mid-sized brand today being able to bring on maybe a contractor style digital marketing specialist, right? Or maybe member, manager. Now it's very viable to bring that person on based on their expertise instead of their geography. And so I think it's really broadened the opportunities, especially for the small guys now, to be able to work in a much more flexible manner. And then going back to Karen's point, also, I think, treating each person like an individual. And so when you are building then the job rec, when you're building then the, opportunity to almost market the wine brand then to these new audiences, including right out of the gate, the call out of the flexibility around an online, home office based position versus in office. I think that is just changing the game today in terms of now so much opportunity for our small and mid-sized brands. The big guys, the mid to large size players, they've always had the opportunity to pick and pull from a larger pool, but I think now the small wine brand is going to have a much more opportunity there.
I think there's another piece as well, which is, this whole gig economy is a whole new deal, right? There are so many people that are doing part-time, and you're right, it's not necessarily in my backyard here in Sonoma, but it could be, in Omaha or Poughkeepsie. And the reality is that, it's important for wine company management to be thinking about which roles do I really need to be part of my team in place here? Which roles do I need to get skill sets and talent from other places that may be more affordable, more convenient, or frankly, just better suited to the role? And then can I use gig workers for that versus taking on additional staff, trying to manage them and do all that stuff? And it requires just another half step of strategic dexterity that I think will be important as we evolve into this new normal.
And I'd throw in there as well, in addition to, especially for the small and mid-size, where it opens up a world of candidates when you're looking outside of your immediate geographical area. But layer that on top of having to think about, well, especially here in a state like California, you've got, many different laws that you have to be aware of, and you have to start figuring out how you're going to comply with them. And so that's just another layer to it. It certainly can be done, and I see it done more and more frequently. And looking outside of the industry, people don't have to be in the wine industry for many positions. I think it's helpful, but it's not a requirement, and that also opens the door for more candidates.
Yeah, I think that's where getting organized back of the house versus front of the house, right? A lot of times then from that perspective down, when you're looking at the organizational structure in the last couple of years, we can easily determine, usually front of the house, you're going to have that local brand ambassador, regional brand ambassador skill set, right? To be able to make recommendations, to be able to talk to a wine center visitor or, referral partner or what have you in a way that's relatable to that wine region. But outside of that front of the house role, I think many of the back of the house skill sets today are requiring much more of a specialized role in terms of, systems management and everything from the member management software, the e-com management, which has been a huge evolvement in the last 2 to 3 years, especially.
Well, good. I'll tap onto that and take it a step further, which is, one of my pet peeves I've had about this industry since the 10 years I've been in it, plus is it's always so focused on what's happening in my tasting room today and who's walking through my door. And I think what we've learned by virtual tastings, B, by the growth in e-commerce, by C, the different types of delivery systems and the flexibility that's been created, as well as the surge of DTC availability. So we've got to stop thinking about just what's happening in my tasting room and instead start thinking about how do I connect with that visitor who may never step in the state of California again? How do I do repeat sales to that person? How do I stay in contact with that person? How do I do follow-up sales, club, whatever it is? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here with you, Sandra, but it's this whole notion of we got to start thinking of wine as a consumer good. There's not just Napa Sonoma centric so much as it's a good that people all over the country, all over the world, in fact, want. And how do we start changing our paradigm shift for how we get people thinking about that and then leveraging the heck out of that?
Right. And you're absolutely right, Joel. And you're preaching to the choir. And by the way, I'll pay you later. But I think even about the wholesale side, you think about now sales reps across the nation who've been working for a mid to large size producer for years. They've had to become now fully virtually equipped to be able to better engage with their, restaurant, retail clients, et cetera. So I think it's a really interesting and dynamic opportunity to look at now the expansion of the in-person, the in-person requirements at a winery space or your corporate office versus the virtual. And so I think the possibilities are endless there.
So let me ask you this. If we're thinking about our employees as brand ambassadors, and again, they can be anywhere, local or remote, how then can employers get that personal touch that we were talking about earlier and make sure that those folks are feeling engaged with the wine community, that they're feeling appreciated, that they're feeling that they're getting the education and all the incentives that we talked about for in-house employees? How can they manage that?
First step is to use this a little less and this a little more. Listen more talk less, quit presuming you think you know, right? And you can do it formally through surveys and other tools that, our tools of the trade, or it can do it simply by having effective dialogue. But first step is start asking the right questions, start engaging in discussions about what's important to people versus presuming that you know it all. Because the reality is, as a couple of the other panel members have said, we're dealing with individuals, and individuals all have different circumstances. And one thing we've learned that's been fun in this Zoom world, where all of a sudden I'm invited into people's houses, Stacy, I see your instruments in your background, and I wonder what's going on there. And it's an opportunity to connect with people in different ways than we've ever had before. And it's different than the water cooler, right? It has limitations. Part of it really sucks. Part of it's really cool. But start with asking more questions, start with getting in tune and helping people feel empowered, and then going down that path.
And I think also the managers now have a need to customize every interaction with their remote staff today. Whereas, before maybe you could get away with like once a week, a group, check in with a team where everybody gets on Zoom and shares kind of their progress reports or what have you. But I think today, with so many working remotely and again, having different needs of how they like to communicate and how they like to stay engaged, I think it's learning the communication style of your remote workforce and then building a checkpoint, building a check-in with each of those individuals from week to week that makes most sense.
Completely agreed. The frequency of those check-ins, one-on-ones in particular, super, super important. And you can't let the priorities of the day distract or take away from, let's reschedule our one-on-one because, something else came up, because then you're in a cycle of missing your meetings and getting farther and farther out of touch with each of your employees.
I actually have a client where I've just put in place a whole system about weekly, monthly, and quarterly meetings, not because they're not well-intentioned, but because it's so variable if you leave it up to their own, what they say about the road, the road is paved with best intentions is, the more we can institutionalize some of this stuff and put work processes in place that help managers do the right things at the right times, the higher the probability of a good outcome that comes out there, right? Saying that it's rigid, but I really want senior management in particular to be thinking about how do I make sure this happens on a regular basis, because it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy if it happens or if it doesn't. Right. And if it doesn't happen, you start getting distance, you start getting disconnection, and people start looking for greener pastures. And that's where you get turnover.
Yes. And so before COVID also, I keep talking about the pre-COVID era and the COVID era. That's pretty much where we're at, I feel like today. But pre-COVID, I think, our mid to large size winery clients across the US, they were doing a really good job with implementing project management software systems like Basecamp and like some integrations, with their Salesforce of the world or whatever that looked like. And I think with that said, enabling and empowering the remote workforce to have really clear expectations and understandings of what their, weekly goals are, monthly goals are, quarterly, and how they all feed into that contribution and meeting those goals. So I think the project management software components are really good supporting roles. But then the need to layer on, as Joel mentioned, that personal touch, that that constant check-in based on how the employee needs to communicate is essential.
I was just going to say, I think it's also continuing to change our habits, right? And how we worked this way forever, and we're still adapting to working a new way. It's taking time. And so it just takes a lot of diligence to make sure that you're keeping in touch on a regular basis and taking good notes, because we're moving so fast. We're talking about a lot of things all at once, and you don't want to let anything drop.
And it sounds like this kind of personal connection is also a good way for managers to monitor employee progress and job fulfillment. Because I know one of the things that can be a little nerve-wracking if someone wasn't working with remote employees before is, well, how do I know that they're staying on top of the job, that they're getting what they need to get done? But it sounds, at least what I think I'm hearing, is that as long as we have that kind of open communication, we have these weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings, we make expectations clear, it's kind of fulfilling both the satisfaction of the employee as well as the job part of the job, right?
Right. And I mean, the last 3 to 5 years, there have been some amazing articles with great, very important data points around the productivity of the at-home employee, right? And so, the pandemic, of course, has pushed the need to go this way more than we've ever seen in the wine industry, because we've kind of late to the game when it comes to enabling, empowering remote workforces. But the data points, the articles that we can see now, the surveys around employee productivity at home, I think it's just really refreshing, really encouraging. But some key takeaways from the latest articles and data points around that is that it's not a one size fits all. And Karen talked about this earlier. It's not one size fits all. It's that every individual performs a little bit differently in the remote world. And so just really figuring out what gets them excited. Are they super organized in project management software? Is that going to get them excited? Do they like to use instant messaging tools to stay connected with their team if they have a quick question? Is that their communication channel of choice, right? So I think on the onboarding side of things, those are really important questions to ask early on so that you don't have that remote workforce getting turned off.
You just keyed on a really important point, which is the connection that our workforce has with their peers and their coworkers. We've been focused a lot on boss-subordinate relationship. There's this whole piece too about how do you further, connect what used to be the culture, because we saw each other every day and would laugh at a silly shirt or someone's, whatever, and would have connections. So how do we foster connections in this brave new world? I think it takes a conscious effort, and it's a learning experience. Right? We got to figure out what's going to work and keep building on it versus presuming, oh, here's the one thing you can just go put in place and it will work. Okay.
And Karen, you sound like you had something to add?
Yeah, well, I was going to go back to measuring productivity for a minute. I think that in most cases we have historical productivity data, which can help with trying to figure out, am I measuring my remote workers' productivity fairly? Are they underperforming? Are they, meeting past productivity numbers? And I think it's important that through that communication, that the frequency of making sure that employees understand where they are in terms of their KPIs and whatnot, instead of once a quarter, once every 6 months, once a year, every week. And some people will adapt very easily and some will not. Some will struggle. Some will, just are not equipped to work from home. And so you have to be aware of all these different factors to figure out, is there something I can implement, something I can put in place to support my remote worker? Or, do they need to come in to the office, if that's even a possibility, if they're, in the same county?
Well, and I look at the productivity measures as being doesn't fit for every job either. When it comes to, how many workers do I need to go prune a vineyard? Okay, I know so many per acre per hour. I got that down, right? When it comes to, what's the productivity of a tasting room manager? What's the productivity of a marketing manager? That's such a squishy, hard to measure thing. I'd rather just get clean, as Karen said, on what are the KPIs. Let's get really clear. What are the deliverables? What's the right time and expectation in terms of getting that stuff done? And that's how we'll measure productivity over time. And then you have to be careful on the other side, which has been a lot written lately about worker burnout, right? And burning out people. They're just working too hard. And you got to be careful, because it's now that we're sitting at home, it's easy to spend, I've had my wife stop after 20 hours. She's been cranking away on stuff and she's just getting fried. So there's a little bit of self-discipline, as well as part of it. I think it's up to us as managers to tune into people once in a while and make sure that you're helping them gauge this brave new world as well, that they're not going too far on the other end, because once they burn out, their output goes way down, and frankly, they get disillusioned with that connection in the job. So, you get a lot done soon, but it's not lasting. It's like a sprinter versus a marathoner. And I want people in for the long race, not the short race.
And I would throw in there as well, Joel, I think that's a really good point, is the awareness of the supervisor manager, making sure they don't be respectful of employees' boundaries, right? As tempting as it might be to call somebody at 6 o'clock at night, probably shouldn't. Let them have their time.
Don't call me at 6 a.m. 6 at night is fine.
But understanding those boundaries, I think, is a really, really good point. If they prefer 6 a.m. over 6 p.m., then make a note of that if they prefer 6 p.m. over 6 a.m. or if they're just strictly 9 to 5, I think understanding those boundaries that's a really good point. So we've been talking a lot about remote employees, which I know is kind of the way of the future, but I do want to talk just briefly about people that can't work from home just because that's the nature of the job. Like we talked about front of house, you can't really host a tasting room if you're not in the tasting room. Obviously if you're in production, you need to be at the winery. If you're in the field, you need to be in the field. So what are some key considerations, to make sure that these people that have to come in are feeling safe with everything that's going on?
Mm-hmm. I could just, speak to the tasting room model. I think that the outdoor spaces, right? So that's the name of the game. And I think as this pandemic continues to, hopefully work its way out here over this next year, many, winery owners and stakeholders are looking all the way through this next summer at, optimizing outdoor spaces, not only from a visitor enjoyment and safety perspective, but also from a staff enjoyment and safety perspective, right? So I think leading with outdoor safe spaces is really going to be important for the next year onward. I think this is going to be something that's going to be ingrained, I think, in the long-term plans now with how wine brands develop their visitor spaces. And so also, I just think sensitivity to how staff interacts with guests in the tasting rooms. And so that, touch, while you want to remain high touch in the hospitality world, we also have to learn how to be high touch in a touchless world. And that's a really hard, it's a rough dynamic, and so I just think that empowering your employees to know, where to take that, providing more touchless tools and encouraging visitors a lot of times to look at their smartphone. 95% of visitors today are coming in with a smartphone. So when they're thinking about shopping wines or thinking about signing up for a membership program today, 95% of the time that can happen right through the winery website using that smartphone that's in the pocket or purse of that visitor. So just becoming a little bit more mindful of how the visitor experience should unfold in that hour and a half.
I think talking about safety, and getting employees' input as well. But I think the companies I've seen do it really well, have embraced, in the last 3 years, obviously COVID, but it's constantly educating and talking about it and making sure employees really get that they're vested in employee safety, and supporting employees if they have questions or concerns. How do I have to go interact with this customer who is coughing, even though they've got their mask on, they're coughing, and I'm concerned about that. So I think that the messaging around safety and having a really robust safety program, which includes COVID protocols, is really critical.
And it's a politicized topic, right? And it's tough. You have people from one end of the spectrum to the other. And my advice with all my clients has been, there's a safe road to take here, right? Which is employee safety is job one. It's true in the vineyard. It's true in the cellar. It's true in the tasting room. It's true all over, right? We need to provide a safe place for our employees to work and to do their jobs. And that means if I'm going to err on the side of masks or no masks, you err on the side of masks. It isn't rocket science here. The health departments have told us what to do. The challenge at times is variable enforcement, right? I know I've gone to many a tasting room where all of a sudden, their mask is down around their neck, and they're pouring wine and talking to people, and I'm going like, this ought not be so hard, people. But the reality is, we're going to know from 5 years from now, and I've had this talk with many an employment attorney, we're going to know 5 years from now what the right path would have been in terms of some of the stuff, because there are going to be some ugly lawsuits one way and the other way, right? Some people being too lenient, some people being too harsh in terms of stuff. I guarantee you the penalties for being too harsh are going to be a lot less than being too lenient, right? At least you open yourself to punitive damages and other issues if you kind of half enforce it and someone gets sick or other people have, whatever factors happen there, but at the end of the day, make sure your workplace is as safe as you can possibly make it. You don't run around with bad tires on your fork trucks. You don't run around with all sorts of things on the floor and spills all over the place. you provide a safe workplace, and that includes all this pandemic protocols and such as well. Personal.
And stakeholders need to look at things from the top down too. So, I think regionally, what are others? What are your peers doing in a specific wine region? So I think I talked earlier about being able to go broad in some ways instead of having to be constricted to a region when it comes to those back of the house positions or specialized positions. But I think when it comes to those front of the house positions, that's where you have to really stay on top of what's happening within your wine region. What are the unique nuances? What are the latest, protocols, and what are your peers doing? Because from a visitor experience, if one tasting room up the road has very specific protocols and mandates and, signage about what the visitor experience is going to entail, and then, most in that region are doing it that way, and then you're the only one that's not, that's going to create a pretty negative guest experience. It's going to make it really hard also on your employees to maintain a positive experience, a work, attitude.
Really good point.
Mm-hmm.
I almost hate to ask this question, but to Joel's point about being too harsh, what about vaccine mandates or requirements for employees? Where does that fall in here?
It's all very difficult for the companies I've worked with that have implemented them. There isn't one that didn't take it very seriously. It's a very difficult decision to make. They're doing it because they care so much about their employees' safety, but they also recognize they're likely going to lose some of their valuable employees as a result. And that is a really, really difficult place to be. But sending a bigger message that, that's how important this is to, we want to keep everybody safe.
Some of it's being dictated by the rest of the industry. There are a couple big distributors, Southern among them, that has said no one walks into our offices that isn't vaccinated boosted. Mm-hmm. So as a result, if your employees aren't vaccinated boosted, they can't make their calls, and that's driven a couple of my clients to say we're gonna mandate this. It's going to be a job requirement, and we can't make what's called accommodations for people to be totally virtual in a job that has to be at times face-to-face. It's very difficult to pour samples and taste wine from 200 miles away. So it's pushed some people, and we see it, I think it started with the banking industry. A lot of New York City brokerages said, we're going to demand of all our employees. It's just how we do our business. And so you got to be in tune with that. At the same time, have some compassion for those that feel differently and think differently, whether it's needs accommodation or just a deep set belief. People are going to think different. So, be careful about pissing people off. You can make a good business decision, but realize this goes back to being, how to become an employer of choice, right? Is if you're doing things in harsh and unempathetic ways, you're going to piss off people, and guess what? That word spreads like wildfire in today's world, whether it be Glassdoor or other social media places. So, always be thinking about the bigger picture at the same time is my advice.
Well, I want to open it up to you guys. Is there anything else that, any tips, advice that you want to put forth that we haven't touched on already, just in terms of, best practices for employee relationships?
I could probably take it from a DTC perspective and then turn it over to Joel and Karen if they want to go more broad. But I think when it comes to the DTC play, and we think about the hospitality side of the wine industry, there are some evergreen, practices that I think we're going to want to continue to focus on and build out regardless of the pandemic situation. And when we look at the retention opportunities in this very competitive landscape we're in today, we need to get more and more creative with how we retain top performers based on who they are and what's important. I mean, a simple example, you've had a hospitality director or maybe club manager on board for 5 years. They've become a big brand ambassador within your respective wine region. They serve on several boards, and the pay is, comparative. They know that they're being paid well. They know that they've had their time in now and that they've got some clout. But I think beyond that, it's getting into an understanding of what's important to them from a holistic perspective. Like, do they love to go to yoga 3 times a week? Do they belong to a yoga studio in your wine region where maybe the employer can help supplement the monthly cost of that yoga studio membership? Are there certain certifications in the wine world, or maybe in whatever their role is? Maybe it's a member management, course that they'd like to be able to take that would better them and keep them as a subject matter specialist in their roles. Is that something that the stakeholders could look at subsidizing or maybe even paying for as a retention benefit? And then on the flip side of that, staying on top of what your regional trends are in terms of what new hires are expecting when it comes to the full compensation package. And Joel, you talked about it, I think, spot on. People will continue to do business with people they like, they respect, they admire, and employees will continue to serve and remain loyal to employers who also treat them right with respect, with kindness, with intention, and treat them as individuals based on what's most important to them holistically.
That's a great segue to a comment I was going to make, which is one of, what's our company culture? How do we interact with each other? And it's always been an amorphous kind of what is culture and how do I adjust it? And yet I think it's become even more important today because we don't have all the typical touch points we used to have. We don't have all those ways we used to shape and mold culture. And at times we're very removed from each other more than we ever have been. So I think it's time to double down on that question of culture, which of course is, the culture of any company is, it stems from the behaviors, right? It stems from what people do, not what they say, but what they do, right? Doesn't mean we put more posters up on the wall. It means we start thinking more about our interactions. We start thinking about the connections with each of our employees, how they want to be treated, what's going to motivate them and drive them, and when people don't fit in, how do we let them go in the right ways? Because it all affects what this underlying culture is that is core, part and parcel to how you become and stay an employer of choice, right? If your culture sucks and it's toxic, you're not going to retain A-level performers. You might be able to keep some C-level performance, but your business isn't going to perform to the level you really need it to. So the how do you shape, mold, modify, and play with this whole idea about what's our company culture as we go into this, pandemic and post-pandemic world is going to become a differentiator of success or non-success, I think.
Karen, closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, I agree with both Sandra and Joel on this. I think sort of going back to the yoga comment that Sandra made, those personal touches and extra efforts that are made from above, from the top, I think do go a long way. I see employees react in a really positive way. And so that would be speaking for retention and attraction, right? It's not just trying to keep your valuable employees, but how do we differentiate ourselves from the attraction side? I think you have to have a really good elevator speech because the candidates are looking at you just as much as you're looking at them. And I think that, being able to be seen as a progressive company that offers different ways to work is also a big attraction point.
Great. Well, Sandra, Joel, Karen, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate learning from your expertise. And this is where I will hand it back to George.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.